March 2011, when the Fukushima Daiichi disaster began. As for TEPCO, well, they're not exactly hurting these days. Tokyo Electric Power Company received a multi-billion-dollar government bailout to keep it afloat in the face of massive cleanup and compensation costs tied to the accident, and somehow TEPCO turned that around and for 2013 made $4.3 billion with a B dollars in profits. Now Kyushu and Hokkaido are saying, "But you helped out Fukushima. Why can't you help us too, huh, mama, huh, ma, huh?" Where in the world did they get the idea that companies that are run badly and do harm are still entitled to make a profit? Ray Lutz will have something to say about that as regards Southern California Edison. But for now, Kyushu Electric Power, Hokkaido Electric Power, and throw in TEPCO as well. You are this week's
Nuclear Hot Seat Numbnuts of the Week.
Well, if TEPCO's got that money, there are people who deserve to be paid. A former worker is seeking 11 million yen, or the modest amount of $110,000 in compensation from the operator of Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant for exposing him to high levels of radiation. Back in 2011, the worker was part of a team sent to lay electric cables in one of the reactors only 13 days after the accident. He said in a 2012 interview that plant operator TEPCO should have known about the high radiation levels and warned them. Doesn't that sound familiar? That is the exact same claim that is made by the sailors of the USS Ronald Reagan in their $1 billion lawsuit against TEPCO for damages for being subjected to radiation off the charts and not being warned by the company. Among the illnesses that have already shown up in these sailors, who were before that healthy young Americans, are leukemia, brain cancer, brain tumors, testicular cancer, dysfunctional uterine bleeding — women explain what that means to the men — gallbladder removals, thyroid illnesses, hypogonadism, ulcers, and stomach ailments. And the radiation exposures not only hurt these young sailors, but also hurt their children who were born after their parents' exposure. All of this is documented by Charles Bonner, who is one of the attorneys dealing with the case, and it goes back to court on July 12 in San Diego, as TEPCO is filing for it to be dismissed. One can only guess what they're trying to do to this rather modest request from a former worker for the equivalent of $110,000. The worker's so scared he will not even allow his complete name to be used, only his first name, Shinichi, and that is because of the social stigma of being labeled a troublemaker in Japan, let alone someone who has been harmed by radiation. And speaking of radiation, which we do all the time here on Nuclear Hot Seat, the European Geosciences Union General Assembly put together a team of scientists to look at the radiation dose received in North America as a result of Fukushima fallout. And the number they came up with is 400 trillion becquerels of cesium-137. They labeled this amount hazardous on a continental scale. One physicist talked about the certainty of receiving cancer if even a single radioactive particle, what Arnie Gundersen calls hot particle, is ingested. The team released its findings during an academic session of the aforementioned European Geosciences Union General Assembly, and one scientist, Michio Aoyama, who is a professor at Fukushima University's Institute of Environmental Radioactivity and a part of the team, told Kyoto News that TEPCO underestimates — isn't that an understatement word? — underestimates the amount of cesium-137 that was released by Fukushima. Before we go into our next interview, I want to join in the happy dance that the Nuclear Hot Seat website is up again and finally looks much like it did before the hack attack. Yay! I may have gophers in my garden, but no more hackers on the website because we have locked down security. For those who missed last week's update, it was labeled a brute force login attack — that's actually a technical term — and it originated variously from Japan, Saudi Arabia, Bosnia, and it's continuing from bots around the world. They may be knocking, but they can't get in. Now, all of this security, all of this reconstruction did not come without a cost. I'm working now on a new improved website that's going to have even more security because it's a more recent version of a website and even better functionality and searching. So for those of you who have donated to help meet the cost of this, thank you so much. We couldn't have gotten this far without you. And now, just a little bit more help is needed to meet this challenge. So if you can, please, go to nuclearhotseat.com. And again, I just love being able to say that again. Didn't know how much I missed it. But go to the homepage, scroll down just a little bit, and click on the not as big as before, but still a big red donate button. Your assistance will go directly to covering the expenses incurred by the website fix, and the new security systems will make certain that we stay up now for the duration. So whatever you can do to help, my gratitude. Ray Lutz of Citizens Oversight Project brought his engineering background to bear on the successful battle to keep the San Onofre reactors shut down. He now monitors the actions of the California Public Utilities Commission, or CPUC, on the final settlement on San Onofre. Good thing he's doing this, too, along with Women's Energy Matters and the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility. Great group of groups. But man, this is so necessary because you're not going to believe, well, maybe you will, but still, it's incredible. The fast one that the nuclear industry and our own regulatory body, put that in quotes, is trying to put over on the ratepayers of Southern California.
The California Public Utilities Commission, or CPUC, has proposed a settlement in the case of San Onofre. Give us a brief overview as to what they're saying in the settlement, and then we can get into what's wrong with it.
This is the investigation into the outage at the San Onofre nuclear power plant. So the settlement proposal is actually not, put forward by the CPUC, although it's within their process. It's been put forward by Southern California Edison, SDG&E, and especially TURN, which is the Utility Reform Network, which is the only outside party that negotiated it.
Was that a group that was representing the interests of the ratepayers in a substantive way, or was it a pro-nuclear group?
In theory, they're representing the ratepayer. That's their stated role. However, there is some question because of the way the compensation is doled out as to what these groups' priorities wind up being in the end. This deal that they put on the table was negotiated in secret, it turns out, for about the last 6 months. And then on March 27th, they invited all the parties into a meeting, and they said, here it is, it's done, and you can't make any changes, but you can ask questions about it.
That's outrageous. In other words, as far as they're concerned, it's a fait accompli and you have to accept it, or what?
It looks like it has already been approved by the Commission, and when I say that, I mean the California Public Utilities Commission, which is overseeing this cost issue, as opposed to the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which does only the safety part. So this deal, I believe that the utilities would not have ever, mentioned it or said that they came to a conclusion unless they were already, 100% sure that the Commission would approve it.
Tell us what this proposed, probably done deal, but maybe not settlement consists of.
The grand total is $3.3 billion.
And that's going to who?
That's coming out of the ratepayers' pocket and going into the utilities' pocket and their investors.
This is for a failed nuclear reactor where Southern California Edison was the one who made the mistakes with it.
Right. And you see, what's really infuriating about this whole thing is the way that they have avoided the actual most important part of the proceeding, which was the investigation into why the steam generators failed and who was responsible. They spent the last 18 months fiddling around with other things, and this was supposed to be Phase 3, and there was 4 other sub-proceedings that were merged into the Phase 3, and now with the settlement on the table, the goal is, of course, to not ever even start the Phase 3 record. So there is nothing in the record at all about the steam generator failures and whether anybody was prudent or not.
So this is money proposed to go to Southern California Edison because they're not operating anymore without any sense of responsibility, liability, ratepayer refunds that were supposed to happen. Is any of that going to happen at all? Can that be reinstituted?
There is a number of buckets, within the $3.3 billion, and there's at least one bucket that we kind of agree with if they don't get any other money, and that is the power that was purchased when it was offline, because that power would have been bought even if the plant never was built in the first place, and that amounts to about $517 million. Interestingly enough, another item on the list is what they call O&M, which is operations and maintenance. And that's pretty much what it costs to run the plant. That amount is about $650 million, more than it costs to buy the power. So basically the amount that they wanted to just keep the plant running was more than it costs to buy power on the market. So there's no way these plants are even anywhere close to being cost effective from the standpoint of the ratepayer. From the standpoint of the utilities, they are a gold mine because they can keep pouring in capital for improvements, and then they make a huge sum on the capital improvements. That's their main money-making scheme. So those are the buckets, a couple of the buckets, a couple more. One is nuclear fuel that they had in the pipeline, so to speak, coming in, and the stuff that they just loaded into the reactor, and they probably shouldn't have. And there is also a whole section of this settlement that has to do with the litigation between Southern California Edison and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which built the steam generators. I think that the ratepayers should have no part of the litigation. That's their problem. But they want the ratepayers to be involved, but without any oversight or ability to affect it, but possibly getting some money in the end. I don't know. It's a real, very complex settlement. That's why a lot of people were informed, because they first said this was a $1.4 billion rebate to the ratepayer. But the reason they said that is because they changed the amount from $4.7 billion to $3.3 billion. And so that was a decrease from a ridiculous, obscene amount of money to just a ridiculous and absurd amount of money. And, and so they say that's a rebate. But the $3.3 billion will be paid, according to this plan, by consumers for the next 10 years. And we'll also have to buy power on the market to replace, anything that it didn't produce. So pretty much paying double there. And then they get to do whatever they can from the settlement with MHI. And so there's sort of like triple or quadruple dipping into this thing.
This is even more outrageous than the producers, where they made more money from a Broadway show that failed than one that would have succeeded. This is outrageous, Ray.
Well, unfortunately, what's this brought up for me, because I'm kind of a newcomer to watching the CPUC, another one of the issues that's really a concern is this issue about the intervener compensation. So if you're an intervener, unlike the NRC, the CPUC has a pretty cool thing, at least on the surface, and that is that if you're an intervener and you spend time in these meetings and so forth, you can file for intervener compensation. And sometimes this can be up in the hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. In this case, Turn was the party to negotiate the deal, so they're going to make a lot more by going along and being pliable. And so there's a big incentive to not be that much of an objector to things and just kind of go along and be a intervener in name only.
So, in other words, there's a little bit of a taste that can be provided for anyone who is an intervener, as long as you don't make too much of a fuss about this much larger amount of money. In other words, you're a line item cost.
Yeah, and most of the proceeding, you see, they have all these weeks of proceedings up there, but pretty much nothing that was done in those proceedings was used in the settlement. And the settlement was worked on in a separate whole track in the smoke-filled rooms. And so on the surface, like what they said was when they started this, we're going to be really holding their feet to the fire. We're going to investigate this, because the public was enraged. So time went on, and they just have let the public kind of calm down, and they were hoping that no one would see this. And what we're trying to do is shine a big bright light on it and let people see that what's going on here is basically a $3.3 billion bailout of a company that imprudently